The Nike Vaporfly Fore, the shoe that started super shoes over 8 years ago, now lighter and more propulsive, how does version 4 stack up against the Vaporfly legacy? A new Vaporfly is always a special thing. I have always run on the Vaporfly. I've always been a Vaporfly runner. All of my PRs and the majority of my road racing have also been in all versions of the Vaporfly. So I take the Vaporfly very seriously. I've already done a technical overview and analysis of this shoe. I'll put a link in the description to that video. I'm going to touch on everything I talked about in that video in this video, but I'm not going to go into detail. That's why I did it as a separate video. So if you want to get more info on some of the technical stuff I talk about in this video, go check that video out. Otherwise, let's jump in. Starting with the specs of this shoe, we have 35 mil of foam in the heel, 29 mil of foam in the forefoot, giving you a 6 mil drop. I'm going to say that the 6 mil drop in this shoe feels like a true 6 mil. If anything, it feels like an 8 mil drop. And that is because of the change to the carbon fiber fly plate found in this shoe, which I'll talk more about in the midsole section of this shoe. The shoe weighs 5.92 ounces or 168 grams. And as you can see, the pair that I have are right around that spec. This is a very lightweight shoe that doesn't make a lot of compromises for durability. It should still be a fairly durable shoe as far as super shoes go. And the ride characteristic and ride profile of this shoe is sharp. That is really the only way I can describe this shoe. Sharp in the sense that it's nimble, it's direct, it's responsive. It is everything you want out of a Vaporfly. Moving to the upper of this shoe, this is one of the biggest, most noticeable changes of this shoe that has a ton of changes. We have a one-piece engineered mesh upper that is very light, very breathable, and very conforming to the foot. A lot of the issues with the previous version, the Vaporfly 3, where there's a lot of bagginess around the toe box of the shoe, is now completely gone in this. This textile, which is a woven TPU material, feels like it's an iteration from the upper textile that was in the Vaporfly Next Percent 2. It's not the same upper material. It's a much better upper material, but it feels like the team went back to that material to develop this material. As I said, it's very simple. We have a very simple toe bumper here. We have some reinforcement along the eyelet chain. There's some reinforcement around the ankle collar. The heel counter actually is fairly stout given how lightweight this shoe is. And there's a lot of structure here to contain the heel in the back of the shoe. Overall, very simple upper, fits very well around the foot, extremely breathable, and sheds water really well. This shoe is 168 grams. The first run I did in this shoe was in torrential rain, the heaviest rain I've run in a long time. And when I got in from that run, I weighed the shoe, and the shoe weighed 173 grams. So it gained about 5 grams of water overall. This shoe sheds water really well. And when it gets super hot here in Taipei, I think just being breathable and letting my foot breathe and get rid of all the sweat that will ultimately be in the shoe, this is going to be an excellent upper update for wet conditions, hot conditions, and really everything else. I'm really impressed with this upper. A couple other big changes to this shoe in the upper are really 3 things. The first is the eyelet chain. As you see, it's a straight eyelet chain. Gone is that offset eyelet chain that just could cause a ton of problems for many people's feet. Now, my feet are high volume. I have a high arch, so my foot is very high volume, especially in the midfoot. This new straight eyelet chain sits directly on top of my foot, and it puts the tongue, which is now wide enough and not too long. If you've run in a Vaporfly before, you know that getting the tongue in the right place with the Vaporfly dance that you always had to do, it's completely gone in this shoe. Now this tongue, because of this straight eyelet chain, just sits on the top of the foot. The tongue is now wide enough that it actually goes past the eyelet chain, which is something the Vaporfly has never really done. And it just sits, as I said, on top of the foot. And you basically put your foot into this shoe, the tongue sits on the top of your foot, and you tie the shoe. There's none of that dance that we've always had to do in the Vaporfly, and it feels quite great. The last component to this are these new laces. These are now slightly elastic. They're not overly elastic. I've complained a lot about elastic laces on super shoes. But this is the right balance of just enough that you can really lock this shoe down and really zone it out. So I tend to like a tighter fit at the base of the eyelet chain at the top, and I leave it a little looser here because I have a bit of a bump in both my feet in this area. And this elastic lace system allows me to really control that. But the tongue is structured enough and wide enough and sits on the foot well enough that it protects the foot and there's no lace bite in the shoe. Overall, an exceptional midfoot lockdown in this shoe. And lastly, moving into the heel of the shoe, as I already said, this is a very stout heel counter in this shoe, more than you would expect it to be in a shoe that's this lightweight. And there's a lot of reinforcement material back here that's really going to cradle the heel. There's also the typical pad back here that will lock the heel down into the shoe, creating a pocket back here. The foam material in this version's pad feels a little firmer than previous ones. But again, I'm getting great heel hold down in there. However, it is still a Vaporfly heel. If you've had heel lift issues before, you're probably still going to struggle with them in this shoe. But you do have long enough laces. You can do a runner's knot in this shoe. And you should be able to lock down the shoe well enough, because this shoe now has exceptionally good lockdown, that you should be able to work around it. But overall, this upper is simple, it's light, it's breathable, it wraps around the foot really well. The lockdown is really great, and it's everything it needs to be with nothing that it doesn't. Moving to the midsole of this shoe, we have a full-length ZoomX, the full PBEX ZoomX variant of ZoomX. It's the race version, the same ZoomX that we've had in all versions of the Vaporfly to date. And sandwiched between the two-piece ZoomX midsole is a full-length carbon fiber plate. But that's one of the other big changes to this version of the Vaporfly, is Nike has changed the curvature of the plate a little bit. We still have that drop in the midfoot, though they've adjusted the angle a little bit. It still comes close to the ground, and then you have a toe spring, so it's a low plate configuration shoe. But the difference is, and you can really see it here, is that the plate now goes up into the heel. It doesn't just go flat back like it did in the previous versions of the Vaporfly. It now basically rides right under the heel. So when your heel is in this shoe, it's basically sitting directly on the plate in the heel, which makes this shoe feel much more propulsive. And you can clearly see what I'm talking about here. As you can see in the Vaporfly Next% 2 and the Vaporfly 3, that the plate sat a little bit away from the heel. There was a chunk of foam between the heel and the plate, whereas in the Vaporfly 4, the plate basically comes straight up to the heel. There is a sliver of foam between the heel and the plate, but what that's giving you is a much more propulsive across the entire foot feel. Traditionally, the Vaporfly's propulsion has come from the midfoot of the plate, that central curve in the plate compressing along with the toe spring. You felt that the front of the plate is really propelling you forward. However, in the Vaporfly 4, because of that adjusted curve in the midfoot, you're getting more propulsion there. You're still getting the propulsion off the toe spring, but now you're getting some propulsion off the heel. And that change is a big deal. It's the first time Nike's really adjusted the fly plate in the Vaporfly since the original 4%. And it's a big deal. They did that to engage the ankle more in the shoe, where you do feel like the entire midsole is working for you. And I will say that you feel propulsion through the entire length of the shoe. It's not just up here in the forefoot, it's across the entire midsole of the shoe. Your ankle really now is engaged in the shoe. Part of the magic of the Vaporfly has always been how the ZoomX foam works with the curvature and the flex of the plate. A lot of other super shoes depend on either the foam or the plate, where the Vaporfly has always been how those two things work together. And this change now that really engages the heel of this shoe, again, makes this entire thing feel extremely propulsive. The other thing I'm going to say about this shoe is that while this is a carbon fiber plate in this shoe, it is more flexible than a lot of other carbon fiber plated shoes. And I'm going to say that this shoe is as flexible as the Vaporfly Next% 1 or 2. It's not quite as stiff as the Vaporfly 3 was, which was surprisingly stiffer than the other previous versions of the shoe. And you really do notice that when you pick this shoe up and put it on foot. It just feels much more natural. It feels like everything in this midsole is working together as one piece. And moving to the outsole of this shoe, as you can see, Nike has gone back to a outsole that's very reminiscent of the Vaporfly Next% 1 or 2. A big piece of rubber in the forefoot, not a lot in the rest of the shoe. I actually really love the outsole of the Vaporfly 3 with the waffles and the cutouts that made that much lighter. However, after running in this shoe, I think having this one piece, rather thicker piece of rubber in the forefoot of the Vaporfly makes a huge difference. This piece of rubber up here makes this shoe feel much more substantial underfoot, and you have that sort of substantial feel of the Vaporfly 1 or 2, which feels really good. However, the pattern here really is designed to flex with your foot, and it works very well. It's a very natural transitioning shoe. This is still a carbon fiber plated shoe, so you're not getting a ton of ground feel, and there's not a ton of flex up here, but I will say that this outsole material and this big piece of rubber up in the forefoot works exceptionally well. As I've already mentioned, the first run I did in this shoe was in torrential rain, just awful wet roads on very iffy pavement, and I had absolutely no fear with grip in this outsole. It worked really well, gripping across all of those surfaces up and down hills, but also on corners. Really, really good. In dry conditions, I've also found that this outsole works exceptionally well. And I'm going to say that you do feel that it's now one piece up here. Again, very reminiscent of the Vaporfly Next Percent 1 or 2. The other big change from the Vaporfly 3 is that they've really streamlined these two pieces of rubber back here. So a lot of the shear problems that people were having tearing them off in the Vaporfly 3 should now be gone. These are just much more natural. They're not going to grip the ground even if you scuff as a heel striker. And you can see the same reductive design that Nike started with the Alphafly 3, reducing weight in the midsole of the shoe and reducing it here in the midfoot of the shoe. I'll talk more about that in the ride section of this video. With all those specs out of the way, let's get into the ride of this shoe. Now, in my ride profile of this shoe, I described it as sharp. And again, what I mean by that is this shoe is very nimble, very direct, very agile, and very responsive. It's everything you want a Vaporfly to be. And in fact, that's what sets the Vaporfly apart from really any other shoe, is that it's just so direct, so responsive. And I'm gonna say up front in this ride section that this shoe sits directly between the Vaporfly 3 and the Next Percent 2. However, it is closer in the ride to the Next Percent 2 than it is the Vaporfly 3. You still have the cushion feel that the Vaporfly 3 added to the Vaporfly, because the Vaporfly Next Percent 1 or 2 could feel very low stack and very race flat like for a lot of people, very minimalist almost. The Vaporfly 3 added more foam, more cushion. This maintains that, but the changes to the midsole, the changes to the curvature of the plate, this big piece of forefoot rubber make this shoe ride much more aggressively direct and sharp like the Vaporfly Next Percent 1 or 2 did. But with that being said, this shoe still is its own shoe. They really have moved this in its own direction. It's still very much a Vaporfly, but as I said, it takes the best out of the Vaporfly 3, combines that with the Vaporfly 2 into something that is quite unique. But it should be agile, it should be responsive, because that's what a Vaporfly is, and I think that's what a lot of people would agree that the Vaporfly 3 was maybe missing, at least at the top end elite level racing. As a non-elite runner, a very much non-elite runner, I have now done 3 workouts in this shoe. As I've already said a couple times, my first workout was a 4-mile run in just torrential rain, going around 10K, 5K pace on very twisty, hilly routes with iffy pavement. This shoe exceeded my expectations. I figured that was probably the best place to start testing this shoe, because if it's going to perform there, it's going to perform really anywhere else. The next run I did in this shoe was really a mix of 1K repeats and 1-mile repeats through a bunch of different paces, marathon pace all the way into 5K pace, but mostly probably half marathon pace. This shoe was very smooth, exceedingly nice to work through, and it just performed really well. And then the last workout I did in this shoe was a 1x10, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, I guess, structured fartlek, where the 1 minute on was 5K pace, the 1 minute off was easy pace. And I really wanted to see how this shoe accelerated, because one of the reasons I've always preferred the Vaporfly is that this is a shoe that really can accelerate. And if you race, you know that in a race, you often need to pick it up to catch someone, to stay with the pack that you're with, to sprint away from someone. And the Vaporfly has always been the shoe that's done that really well for me. And I will say that this shoe exceeded my expectations in that workout of sort of fatiguing my legs, but seeing how well this shoe will pick up pace from easy back into 5, a couple times. It did it so well. Those workouts are runs that I've done in pretty much every shoe, most every super shoe that I've run in over the past couple years, and a few other tempo trainers. And I know those workouts really well. I know how shoes perform on that. And one of the things that really impressed me about this shoe is the geometry of the midsole. As you can see, there isn't an extreme forefoot rocker in this shoe. There is some forefoot rocker in this shoe, but that falling forward, falling off a cliff feel that the Vaporfly Next% 1 or 2 had, or really most other super shoes coming out in 2025, is not here. This is a much more subtle forefoot rocker that allows you to roll forward if you want, but it puts you more in control of this shoe. And that's another thing that's adding to the sharpness of this shoe on foot, is that now with this much more mild forefoot rocker, I can really pick up the pace or sit back and let this shoe roll through a stride really, really well. I'm not just forced to be rolling forward, falling off a cliff because of an extreme rocker, and really allowing the shoe to only really do one thing and dictate how I want to run. I can determine how I want to run in this shoe. And that's something I find very valuable and I love. And this shoe does it extremely well. Another thing I want to mention is various foot strikes in this shoe. Now, this is a Vaporfly. It's really optimized around a 4-foot strike. I happen to be a 4-foot striker. This shoe feels exceptionally good up on the forefoot when I'm up on my toes, hitting a really clean stride, digging in and kicking off the toe. That's what a Vaporfly does. However, I think there's been a couple changes to the plate in this shoe that make this better for midfoot strikers and especially heel strikers. And one of those changes has been Nike's added a little bit more width to the plate here in the midfoot and the heel. Now, as far as midfoot strikers go, there's still a ton of material cut out in this shoe. And if you need a lot of support in the midfoot of your shoe, this is probably not the shoe for you. But it's also no different than any previous Vaporfly. But this slightly wider plate should make this shoe feel a little bit more structured underfoot. And I will say that the extra width is going to help engage all the midsole foam in the shoe that maybe will work better if you've struggled in the past with Vaporflies as a midfoot striker. However, with heel striking, I'm going to say this may be one of the best heel striking options for 2025. Now, it's still a Vaporfly. It's still a very narrow, unstable shoe. ZoomX foam is very compressive, but this added width, and as you can see, the fact that the plate sits right under this orange band, so all of this foam wraps around the bottom of the heel, really giving you sort of that bucket seat feel back here where there's a lot of support and structure for the heel, and the extra width in the plate will make this shoe work better for heel strikers. And one of the biggest differences for heel striking in this shoe will be in the Vaporfly 3 when I was heel striking in that shoe. And I heard a lot of heel strikers complain about this. There was the feel of you would strike the heel, there'd be a compression of the foam in the heel. Most of that was probably the foam between the heel and the plate. There'd be a slight delay as you rolled forward, and then there'd be a secondary compression in the forefoot. And that sort of compression, delay, compression was always something heel strikers did not like about the Vaporfly 3, and it really wasn't present in the Next% 1 or 2, at least not to the same degree as it was in the Vaporfly 3. In this shoe, I'm going to say that heel striking in this shoe, I don't feel that. Because the plate now is directly under the heel and there's a lot more support around the bottom of the heel, you're compressing the foam, which is now rolling you forward, this new plate angle, into the midfoot, which is continuing the compression, and then you're rolling or kicking off the toe. It feels like one midsole again, and it feels really nice. So if you've struggled with heel striking in the Vaporfly 3, this may be one to look at. In fact, in my technical overview video of this shoe, there were a couple people that commented that they ran recent marathons in the Vaporfly 4, mostly the Seoul Marathon and the Tokyo Marathon, and the Vaporfly 4 was one of the most comfortable heel striking shoes that they run in some time, and they all got PRs. So this may be the Vaporfly to look at as a heel striker. The last thing I'm going to say about this shoe on your foot is you do notice how lightweight this shoe is. At 168 grams, it is not as light as the Adidas Evo 1, but it is much more durable, and I will say that this shoe is light enough that you just don't notice it on your foot. And while I don't have an Evo 1 here to test this against, I remember how that shoe felt on foot. And yes, it feels like it's barely there, but it feels like it's barely there in a way that it's going to just kind of disappear, that it's going to kind of fall apart because it's such a delicate feeling shoe. This shoe is super lightweight, but it doesn't feel overly delicate. This does not feel like a shoe I need to baby. It does not feel like a shoe that has made compromises to save weight, that have decreased durability. This feels like a shoe that's going to last quite some time and be a shoe you don't really need to worry about as far as a super shoe goes. In fact, that's one of the main things I'm going to do with this shoe. I am going to drive this shoe into the ground. Now, I actually have two pairs of these. This one that Nike sent me, and then I bought another one after that. So I have one that will stay fresh and I can use later in this year to race in, but I'm going to take this shoe and really drive it into the ground as much as I can to see if that baseline of about 150K of good quality racing and then maybe another 200K of training, that milestone that Vaporflies have always had, still holds true for this shoe. So I will be back with durability check-ins on this shoe as I put more and more time into it. I have a ton of content planned for this shoe. There'll be versus videos, there'll be data deep dives, there'll be some workout videos on this shoe. This will be a shoe that I'll be spending a ton of time in 2025. And as of right now, this looks like what I'll be racing in later this year as well. Overall, I'm very impressed with this shoe. It's nice to have a Vaporfly that feels special again. It feels kind of magical again. This is a shoe that when I put it on my feet, I'm excited to go out and do the workout or whatever run I have planned on. I've never not had that with a Vaporfly, but a new Vaporfly feels even more special, and this one is quite special. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.